Hello everyone and welcome back to Whisky Wednesday. I promise you something controversial and quite fun. You've all already seen the thumbnail or clicked through a link, and here it is. Now for all of you who are British who are watching this, which I think is the second largest percentage of people who watch this channel, we all know what this is. For those of you that aren't British, this is a representation and somewhat of a very good imitation of a very famous chocolate bar brand in the UK. From a company called Cadbury's. Master of Malt have always been ones for a little bit of tongue-in-cheek advertising. So as a result, they have renamed this particular single grain product Dalry milk rather than dairy milk, named after the area of West Edinburgh called Dalry and Gorgie, which is where the North British Distillery lies, which is where this liquid comes from. This cost me £40. I thought it would be a 50 centilitre bottle. It is a full-size 70 cl. It's 45.5% ABV, 16-year-old grain whiskey, which is matured in a 2-to-1 ratio, or blended in a 2-to-1 ratio, of Oloroso is the 2, and Paolo Cortado being the 1. Oloroso sherry you will all know as a typical off-dry sherry. Paolo Cortado is particularly unusual because it begins life as a very dry style of sherry, and is slowly allowed to mature into something that is like an Oloroso. Not quite as sweet as a Pedro Jimenez, but essentially it starts off with a flora cap on top of the sherry, and eventually that is allowed to degrade, I don't know how, and it turns into this beautiful, rich, oxidized style of sherry. This is all natural colour. I believe it is also non-chill filtered. It doesn't say so, but it is natural colour, so I don't think it is non-chill filtered. Some very unusual things about this. I'm just going to bring this key up to the back here. This is kind of all the information that we also have. Hopefully you should be able to see that. In 2009, double check that, the North British Distillery had to install an odour control tower to stop the smells of yeast and funky things wandering through the capital streets of Edinburgh. So I think as a result this is somewhat of an ode to these aromas that would have been wafting around the capital city for quite a long time. The label is very funny. There's some B-roll shots of this on our Instagram and TikTok. If you want to check that out, feel free to. All those links are below. But yeah, let's dive into this. I love old grain. I like grain in general. You know, 16-year-old grain, we're looking at something that's a similar or was a similar age and style to Compass Box Hedonism, the former sort of standard release. 45.4%, my mistake, 45.4. So it's not far off being 46 at all. And this interesting combination of Oloroso and Paolo Cortado in a 2-to-1 blend. Very interesting. Master of Malt did receive a cease and desist letter, I think on April the 7th. So unfortunately you can no longer buy this. And my review is a bit late, so I do apologise, but I love a bit of fun. Bought this purely on an impulse, and I'm very happy I did. But let's see if it lives up to this chocolatey, milky, sweet profile. Yes, yes it does. This is probably the first time I've had this in a nosing glass. I've just been kind of drinking it from a tumbler the last couple of days, just to get used to it. But yeah, it certainly has these rich, desserty tones to it. Wouldn't quite go as far as to say like milk chocolate, but it certainly reminds me, it's quite fudgy. Fudge, like condensed milk. There's like a cinnamon note to it as well. Some nice classic sherry notes too. It's quite nutty. You've got these kind of hazelnut, Brazil nut, Christmas nut mixture bowl sort of thing. And there's like a million different kind of biscuit notes coming at me. There's like digestive notes and like bourbon biscuits. There's even like a custard cream kind of aroma to it. And when you open a biscuit tin, it's just got that nice childhood nostalgicness to it. Let's taste it. Well, that's a remarkably easy thing to drink. I'm just going to make it very clear now. 16-year-old anything, grain, single malt, bourbon, rum, whatever your tipple of choice is, at 45.4% for £40 is a bargain. I hope all of us who bought this have just cracked it open. Very rich, very sticky. Although I've just described it as rich, texturally and like flavour-wise on the palate, it does give off a fairly light approach. It isn't that kind of clawingly sweet, overly like milky kind of profile that you sometimes can get with sherry matured grain whiskies. They can also go quite vinegary at times as well. This one obviously hasn't. But yeah, the flavours are light, but there's a lot of them, and it's moving more into this kind of liquidy, desserty profile. It's chantilly cream and custard. There are more chocolate notes here, I must say. It's got all of this like melted milk chocolate sauce thing about it. Much like the Jack Daniels we reviewed last week, it's very much a case of falling drunkenly into a dessert trolley. But I think with grain, I'm just going to slight tangent. Grain is still a product which a lot of people, I don't think, realise they've drank. So if you've drank blended whiskey for years, you've obviously drank grain whiskey. Many moons ago, there was a product called Snow Grouse. I think in the UK, well, definitely in the UK, but maybe in other parts of the world too. And that was a grain whiskey. It was one of the only whiskies to ever be advertised to be put into the fridge or the freezer to chill it down. It didn't taste very good in general, but I still had customers after 11 years of working in retail coming in asking me for that bottle because it was discontinued a while ago. So people do like grain, but I don't think enough people know what it is. And essentially any type of, I suppose would it be cereal grain? Possibly, but I think any type of grain can be a grain whiskey. It's not about what kind of grain it is, it's just about the distillation technique. So any grain, including malted barley that is put through a column still, is technically grain whiskey. There are limitations with it, with certain percentages you can pull off the still and all that kind of stuff. It still applies with all other rules. It's got to be in cask for at least 3 years in a day and a few other things. But very underrated style of whiskey, and I'm not saying that you should all just go out and buy all the grain whiskey because it's going to be an absolute game changer for your life. It might be for some of you, it might not be for some of the rest of you. But what I think grain whiskey does offer, especially in a format like this, not necessarily as litigious from this company's, the owner of this sort of label of company, but just making it fun and a little bit different and making the flavour profile quite occupying for a customer, I think is one of the best ways you can really show off what grain whiskey can do, because it is a sweeter profile. There have only been a few, and I mean less, I can count them on less than one hand. That phrase came out wrong. You know what I mean? There's less than 5 grain whiskies that I've ever tried that are as good as like an 8 out of 10 single malt. And that's not an ignorance to grain. It just typically, it tends not to be as complex. It can add a lot with malt whiskey to create a blend. You get these big sweet profiles that can counteract spicier, earthier, peatier styles of single malt. So in its own right, it's got a very solid equilibrium within the world of flavour, but on its own, it is generally a lighter, more sort of airy flavour profile. But selling it to people in the sense of, hey, this tastes a bit desserty and kind of like chocolate, you might enjoy it. And it's really good value as well for a 16-year-old whiskey. I think coming up with these flavour profiles and selling grain that way is probably the way to do it. I'm amazed someone like the Scotch Malt Whisky Society haven't done more of that. They're obviously quite intense with their labelling of their bottles and all that kind of thing. But they've got a range of like blended malt whiskies and stuff now, which have some remarkable stories and label designs and names. Still yet to see a grain in that style, so maybe I'll pitch that to Scotch Malt Whisky Society. But yeah, if you've never tried grain, obviously this you can no longer buy, so I do apologise. But if you tend to have a slightly sweeter tooth, You can still buy bottles of the original, or the former, Hedonism released by Compass Box. It's getting to like the £80 mark now, so it's a little bit more expensive. Well, it's double the price of this. It's about the same age, and it is a little bit stronger, although batches did vary. Can't really think of many of the people who are producing grain whiskey or bottling it as a standard release. Obviously, a lot of indie bottlers, but even then, those tend to be single casks, so they're not particularly consistent, cask to cask. But anyway, grain, it's fun. Please dive into it. If you like blended whiskey, you drank it and you already don't realise. So yeah, that's just a little ode to grain whiskey. Well, one more taste of this and then we will score it. One of the good things it doesn't have too is that sometimes grain whiskey can have that kind of industrial, almost like acetone, melted plastic sort of note to it. This doesn't have that, but it also isn't particularly common to find grain matured in sherry barrels. That is not really unusual, but most of the grain you're going to see bottled is going to be in refill or like first fill bourbon. I like this. It's fun. It was affordable. It's a little bit controversial. Flavour-wise, it's not the deepest thing in the world. I'll probably give it like a 7.5 out of 10 in terms of flavour. But this is like a very mature, kind of every night sort of drink. I bet this, with some sweet Italian vermouth and some orange bitters in like a twist on a Manhattan, like a chocolate Rob Roy, would be delicious. So I'm probably going to make that tonight. We'll probably post that on the TikTok and the Instagram, so please go and find us on there if you're more interested in like cocktails and that kind of thing, because we do quite a lot of that. But yeah, this is the Dalry Milk 16-year-old blended whiskey in sherry, Oloroso and Paolo Cortado. Very interesting, very controversial, great story in all senses, and a nice 7.5 out of 10. But thank you all for watching, and I will see you next week. Cheers.